Wait here, 5 minutes. I'll be right back. Those were the last words her son ever said to her. That was 3 days ago. Now Evelyn Harper, 81 years old, was sitting behind a dumpster in the Oklahoma cold. No phone, no medication, no key to a house that her own son had already sold without telling her. One stale biscuit left in her hand, and a stray dog watching her with hungry eyes. She broke the biscuit in half. She gave the dog the bigger piece, because that's who Evelyn Harper was. And somewhere out there, somebody still remembered. If this story moves you, hit subscribe right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me. Every word of this matters. The biscuit was stale. Not day-old stale, not left on the counter stale. It was the kind of stale that crumbles when you breathe on it, or too hard, the kind that tastes like cardboard, and forgotten mornings, and the specific sadness of eating something just to survive rather than to live. Evelyn Harper turned it over in her hands twice before she broke it. She didn't hesitate on which half to keep. The dog, a scruffy, unnamed stray with one torn ear and a faded red bandana knotted loose around its neck, had been sitting beside her. Since sometime in the night, it hadn't barked, hadn't begged. It had simply arrived and stayed the way desperate things sometimes find each other without needing an explanation. Evelyn set the bigger half on the cracked asphalt in front of it. "Go ahead," she said quietly. "You've been waiting longer than I have." That was the moment the gas station attendant, a tired young man named Kevin, who worked the pre-dawn shift and had seen plenty of hard things in his 23 years, glanced out the side window and noticed her for the first time. He watched her give the dog the better piece of food. He didn't go outside. He'd been told not to. Bayo. 3 days earlier, Evelyn Harper had been sitting in the passenger seat of her son Daniel's black SUV, watching the familiar Oklahoma flatlands blur past the window, thinking about nothing more complicated than whether she'd remembered to turn off the stove before they left. She hadn't brought much. Daniel said it was just a quick errand. He'd sounded calm on the phone, that careful, managed calm he'd been using with her for the past year, the kind of voice you use with someone you've already decided can't be trusted with the truth. "We're just stopping to pick something up," he'd told her. "What are we picking up?" Evelyn had asked. "Don't worry about it, Mom." She'd looked at him, then really looked at him, and something in her chest had tightened, the way it does when you recognize a feeling but can't quite name it yet. Daniel had his father's jaw and none of his father's honesty, and she had known that for years. But knowing something and accepting it are two different kinds of pain. The SUV had pulled behind the Morrow Creek gas station on Highway 9, a stretch of road that hadn't been relevant to anything since the interstate bypassed it 11 years ago. The station still operated, barely selling lottery tickets and motor oil and terrible coffee to the occasional trucker who didn't know better. "Wait here a second," Daniel had said, putting the car in park. "I just need to go inside and talk to someone. 5 minutes. I'll come with you." "Mom," his voice sharpened, "just slightly, just enough. I said wait. 5 minutes. It's cold. Just stay in the car where it's warm." He'd taken her purse off the seat as he got out. "For safekeeping," he'd said. "Last time you left it somewhere." She hadn't left it anywhere. She remembered exactly where her purse had been the time he was referring to, but she hadn't argued. She'd waited. 5 minutes became 20. 20 became an hour. The car grew cold. She'd knocked on the gas station window. The attendant, a different one, not Kevin, an older man named Ray who'd worked there 11 years, had looked right at her and then turned away. She'd tried to go inside. The door had been locked. She'd knocked. Ray had cracked it open 2 inches. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to move along. My son is inside." "There's no one inside but me. I'm about to close up the front." "But his car is..." The car was gone. She hadn't heard it leave, hadn't heard the engine. One moment it was there and the next it wasn't, and that was the moment Evelyn Harper understood with the slow and devastating clarity that only comes when something you refuse to believe forces itself into focus, that her son had not gone inside to talk to someone. He had left her there, deliberately, on purpose, alone or home. She didn't cry right away. That was the thing about Evelyn that people would later talk about when everything came out, when reporters and neighbors and strangers on the internet tried to understand who this woman was and how she had survived 3 days behind a gas station at 81 years old in early October in Oklahoma. She didn't fall apart immediately. She sat down on the curb near the dumpsters, out of sight of the road, out of sight of the pumps in the narrow strip of shadow between the back wall and the chain-link fence, and she breathed slowly and she thought. She thought about the phone in her purse, the one Daniel had taken for safekeeping. She thought about the medication in that same purse, the blood pressure pills she took every morning, the small orange bottle that she hadn't missed yet but would. She thought about her house key also in that purse. Then she stopped thinking about the purse because there was no use in cataloging everything you'd lost before you figured out what you still had. What she still had, the clothes on her back, which were not warm enough. A photograph tucked into her breast pocket, an old one creased and slightly water damaged that she carried everywhere out of habit and love. 43 cents in the pocket of her cardigan, which she'd discovered by accident. And the particular stubborn quality that her late husband, Frank Harper, had called her mountain spine. Evelyn, he used to say, you don't bend, you don't break, you just keep being yourself until the problem gets tired and goes away. Frank had been dead for 9 years, but she heard his voice so clearly in that moment that she almost answered him out loud. I'm trying, Frank, she murmured instead. I'm really trying. Yet, the first day she approached 4 people. The first, a woman at the pumps looked at Evelyn's dirty clothes, glanced at the dumpsters, and said she didn't carry cash before Evelyn had even asked for anything. The second, a trucker buying coffee inside, listened to Evelyn explain that her son had left her, and she needed to use the phone to call her sister in Tulsa. He'd nodded sympathetically, reached into his pocket, and given her $2 bills before walking out. The phone request went unacknowledged. The third was Ray, the attendant, who told her she couldn't loiter on the property. I'm not loitering, Evelyn said clearly. I'm stranded. I'm 81 years old and my son left me here and I need to use your telephone. Ray looked at the floor. I can't help you, ma'am. You can't, or you've been told not to. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The fourth person was a teenage girl who actually stopped, actually looked at her, actually said, oh my God, are you okay, and who had pulled out her phone with genuine intention, right up until a middle-aged man in the passenger seat of her car leaned out the window and said, Kaylee, come on, we're late. And she'd said, sorry, and gotten back in the car. She'd driven away. Evelyn had watched her go. Then she went back to her spot behind the dumpsters and sat down against the wall and allowed herself exactly 15 minutes of grief, not crying, just sitting with it, feeling the full weight of what her son had done, and then she made herself stand up again. Because that was the only option that remained. By the third night, the stray dog had appeared. It came around the corner of the building with its head low and its one good ear turning slowly the way animals do when they are assessing whether a situation is dangerous. It stopped 6 feet from Evelyn, looked at her, looked at the space beside her, looked at her again. I don't have anything to give you, Evelyn said honestly. I should warn you up front. The dog sat down 6 feet away and stayed there. An hour later, it was 4 feet away. By the time Evelyn fell asleep sitting up against the wall, it was pressed against her left side and its warmth was not nothing. In the strange arithmetic of survival, it was considerably more than nothing. She named it Red on account of the bandana. It's a stupid name, she told it. Your previous owner clearly had better taste. But I can't see the whole bandana in the dark and I don't know what it says, so Red is what I've got. Red did not object. The morning of the 4th day was when Kevin found her. Kevin Marsh, 23, overnight attendant, part-time community college student, studying nursing because he'd watched his grandmother deteriorate in a facility that didn't have enough staff to care about its patients the way they deserved. Kevin, who'd seen Evelyn through the side window 2 nights before and hadn't gone out because Ray had told him specifically that there was a woman who might come around back and that he was not under any circumstances to engage with her, call anyone, or allow her to use the station phone. Why not? Kevin had asked. Because the owner says so, Ray had said, and the owner says the owner handles it. Kevin had assumed in the way that young people sometimes do when they want to believe the world works the way it should, that handles it meant someone was coming to help her. He understood now that it had meant the opposite. He pushed through the back door at 5:42 in the morning and walked to where she was sitting. Evelyn looked up at him without alarm. Her eyes were calm and direct and surprisingly alert for someone who had been sleeping against a wall in 40-degree weather. Good morning, she said. Kevin crouched down. Up close, he could see how thin she'd gotten in just 3 days. He could see the dried split at the corner of her bottom lip. He could see the careful way she was holding herself together. "Ma'am," he said, "how long have you been back here?" "3 days," Evelyn said. "Going on 4. Something dropped through Kevin's stomach like cold water. "Has anyone?" "No," she said simply. "But don't feel bad about that. I can see by your face you didn't know." "I was told not to." "I figured as much." She patted his hand once briefly with extraordinary gentleness. "That's not the same thing as choosing it. You came out now. That's something." Kevin stared at her. In 13 months of nursing school, no one had taught him how to respond to that kind of grace coming from someone who had every right to be furious. "I'm going to call someone," he said. "Lysia, she said. "My sister is in Tulsa. Her name is Beverly Crane. I'll give you the number if you have something to write with." "I'm calling 911 first." Evelyn considered this. "All right," she said. "That's sensible." She reached into her cardigan pocket and held out a slightly bent photograph. Kevin took it. It was an old photo, 25 years old at least. It showed the inside of a diner, long tables covered with checked cloths, a handwritten chalkboard menu on the wall. And surrounding those tables were rows of bikers, veterans, men with hard eyes, and road-worn jackets. And they were all looking at the camera with expressions that weren't hard at all. At the center of the photograph, standing behind the counter with a coffee pot in each hand, in the particular smile of someone who is exactly where they belong, was a younger version of the woman sitting in front of him. "That's my diner," Evelyn said quietly. "The Lantern Table. We were out on Route 9 for 22 years. She paused. "I used to feed people, when nobody else would." Kevin looked up from the photograph. He looked at the woman in front of him, the dirty clothes, the split lip, the 43 cents she probably still had in her pocket, the dog with the red bandana pressed against her side. "I'll be right back," he said. He went inside and called 911. Then, for reasons he couldn't entirely explain, instinct maybe, or something closer to justice, he pulled out his personal phone and filmed the conversation he was about to have with Ray. Ray confirmed it in 40 seconds. It took 40 seconds for Kevin to ask the right questions in the right order, and for Ray, who was tired and guilty and not as practiced a liar as the man who'd paid him to be one, to say enough. Daniel Harper had called the station owner 2 weeks ago. He'd explained that his mother was going to be dropped off and that she might cause trouble, might try to get people to help her, might say things that sounded alarming. "He said she had dementia," Ray told Kevin, not meeting his eyes. "Said she wandered off sometimes and got confused. Said the family was handling it and we shouldn't interfere." "She doesn't have dementia," Kevin said. Ray was quiet. "She told me her sister's phone number from memory," Kevin continued. "She gave me her late husband's full name and the year they opened their diner and the number of seats it had. She remembered every person who failed to help her and exactly what they said." Ray looked at the floor. "He paid you," Kevin said. It wasn't a question. Ray didn't answer. Kevin walked back outside and sat with Evelyn until the ambulance arrived. He held the photograph while she held the dog. He didn't say anything about what Ray had confirmed. He didn't think Evelyn needed to hear it yet, not the cold financial fact of it, not the $200 that had apparently been the going rate for pretending an old woman didn't exist. What Evelyn needed in that specific moment was for someone to sit next to her like she was a person worth sitting next to. So that's what he did. While they waited, Evelyn talked. Not frantically, not in the disorganized way of someone finally uncorking 3 days of trauma. She talked the way people talk when they've had a great deal of time alone with their thoughts and have already sorted through the sharpest parts. She talked about the Lantern Table. She and Frank had opened it in 1987 with money they'd saved for 11 years. The location was terrible, everyone told them that. Too far from town on a stretch of highway that even then it was starting to feel the early pressure of the new interstate route. Frank said that was exactly why they should be there. He said the people who travel the broken roads need a light more than the people on the highways, Evelyn told Kevin. And he was right. Lord, was he right. The bikers started coming in the second year. A small group, at first regulars on a weekly run between Oklahoma City and Amarillo, who discovered the coffee was strong and the pie was real, and the woman behind the counter looked at them like human beings regardless of what their patches said. Word traveled, the way word travels among people who've been turned away from enough places that a place that takes them in becomes something close to sacred. We never had a policy, Evelyn said. I didn't have a sign that said everyone welcome or no judgment here or any of that. It just was. Frank said a place either has that quality or it doesn't, and you can't fake it with a sign. Veterans came, runaways came, truckers going through hard divorces, women who needed somewhere to sit for an hour that wasn't their own homes. Old men who ordered one cup of coffee and made it last 3 hours because they had nowhere else to be and couldn't afford to be anywhere else. They fed all of them. We charged people when they could pay, Evelyn said. When they couldn't, we didn't. The math mostly worked out. And when it didn't, it worked out anyway because people would come back and pay double when they got on their feet. They'd drive 100 miles to put money on the counter and say they owed it. Kevin listened. The photograph lay between them on the asphalt. He kept looking at it, at the rows of bikers, at the younger Evelyn, with her coffee pots, at the particular atmosphere of a room full of people who had been given, perhaps for the first time in a long time, the experience of being wanted. Do any of them still know you? Kevin asked. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. I'd like to think so, she said. We closed in 2009 when Frank got sick. I couldn't run it alone. The people who came, they didn't come for a business. They came for something that doesn't really have a name. She looked at the photograph. Maybe some of them remember. The ambulance was still 7 minutes out. Kevin was still recording, though he'd shifted the angle. He wasn't sure what he was going to do with the footage yet. He wasn't sure he had the right to do anything with it. He just knew it felt important to bear witness to this woman who had given so much and was now sitting behind a dumpster because her son had decided she was inconvenient. What's his name? Kevin asked quietly. Your son. Evelyn looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd come outside, he saw something that wasn't grief in her eyes, something older and harder and more complicated than grief. Daniel, she said. Just the name. Nothing attached to it. No qualifier, no rush to explain or defend or contextualize. Just the single syllable of the name of the person who had done this to her, released into the cold morning air and left there. Kevin nodded. He wrote the name in his phone. The ambulance arrived. 2 paramedics, a woman named Sophia and a man named Dave, climbed out and came around the back of the building at a pace that became faster the moment they actually saw Evelyn. Ma'am, how long have you been out here? 3 days, Kevin said, because Evelyn was suddenly looking very tired. Sophia crouched in front of her and took her wrist gently. What's your name? Evelyn. Evelyn Marie Harper. I'm 81. I take lisinopril for blood pressure, and I haven't had it in 3 days, and I'm aware that's a problem. She held up a hand before Sophia could speak. I'm not in crisis. I know what crisis feels like. I'm cold and I'm hungry and I'm tired, but I'm thinking clearly, and I'd like to keep holding my dog, if that's all right. Sophia looked at the dog. The dog looked back at her. That your dog? He is now, Evelyn said. Dave was already on the radio. Kevin was still standing there with the photograph, which Evelyn reached out and took back from him with a careful hand. You should keep that somewhere safe, Kevin said. I always do, she said. She tucked it back into her breast pocket. Dave helped her to her feet slowly. She stood steadily, not easily, but steadily. The particular steadiness of a person who has decided to stay upright, regardless of the cost. Is there anyone we should call? Sophia asked. Evelyn looked at her. There was a long pause. My sister Beverly, she said. She's in Tulsa. I'll give you the number. Another pause, even longer. Don't call my son. Sophia absorbed that without reacting. She'd been a paramedic for 14 years. She knew what that sentence meant. Understood, she said. Kevin watched them walk Evelyn toward the ambulance. Red trotted alongside without being directed, staying pressed against Evelyn's left calf, the same way he'd stayed pressed against her side through 3 nights of Oklahoma cold. At the back of the ambulance, Evelyn stopped. She turned around and looked at Kevin across the parking lot. Thank you, she said, for coming outside. Kevin couldn't speak for a moment. I'm sorry it took me so long, he finally managed. Evelyn shook her head once. Not absolution exactly, but something in the neighborhood of it. You came, she said. That's the part that counts. Then she climbed into the ambulance, and Kevin stood in the parking lot with his phone in his hand and the video footage he still wasn't sure what to do with, and he thought about the photograph, about the lantern table, about the rows of bikers with their hard eyes that weren't really hard at all. He thought about what Evelyn had said. Maybe some of them remember. He looked down at his phone. and he posted the video. Done. He had 412 followers. By midnight, the video had been shared 47,000 times. By the next morning, the number was climbing past 160,000, and somewhere in a town 3 hours west, in a garage that smelled like motor oil and old leather, a man with a scar along his jaw looked at his phone. He watched the video once. Then he watched it again. He stood very still for a long moment. Then he picked up the photograph on his workbench, the same photograph, or one taken on the same day with the same rows of bikers and the same checkered tablecloths, and the same woman with 2 coffee pots, and his jaw tightened in a way that the people who knew him well understood as the thing that happened just before he made a decision. He set the photograph down. He walked outside. He picked up his radio. His name was Reaper Cole. And he said 3 words that would echo through biker networks across Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas before the sun went down: find her location. The video had no music, no filter, no caption designed to pull emotion out of people who hadn't earned the right to feel it yet. It was just Kevin's viral shaking phone in the back of a gas station and an 81-year-old woman sitting on cold asphalt telling a paramedic that she took lisinopril for blood pressure and hadn't had it in 3 days, and she was aware that was a problem. That was it. That was the whole thing, and it destroyed people. Not in the performative way that social media content usually destroys people, the brief, hot flare of outrage that cools in 40 minutes and gets replaced by the next thing. This video did something different. It sat in people's chests. It stayed. Men who hadn't cried since their father's funerals watched it twice and had to put their phones down and walk outside. Women who'd spent years caring for their own aging parents watched it and felt a particular sick recognition of this could have been her. This could have been mine. By 10 o'clock that morning, it had been shared into 47 different Facebook groups. 3 of those groups were veteran support communities. 2 were biker chapters. One was a private group called Road Family Oklahoma/Texas/Kansas, which had 11,000 members and a moderator named Gus Tillman, who'd been riding since 1979 and had the particular reputation among his people of being someone who did not forward things without reading them first. Gus read the post. He watched the video. He sat back in his chair. Then he typed 4 words into the group. Someone find this woman. Alarm. Cole Reaper, who went by Reaper everywhere except his mother's house where she refused on principle, had been awake since 4 in the morning because he slept badly these days and had for the past decade and had more or less made his peace with that fact. He was in his garage when his phone lit up. Not once, not twice. 7 times in 4 minutes, which was the kind of frequency that meant either something had gone very wrong or something had gone very right, and in his experience, those 2 things looked the same from a distance. He picked up the phone. The first message was from Gus. You see this yet? The second was from a man named Loco who rode with a chapter out of Enid and was not a man prone to emotional responses. Brother, I am not okay right now. Watch this. The third was a link. Reaper clicked it. He watched the video. He watched it again. The third time he paused it on the moment when the paramedic asked if there was anyone to call, and the old woman said, "Don't call my son." And the way she said it, the pause before it, the weight of everything contained in those 4 words, and something happened in Reaper Cole's chest that he didn't have clean language for but recognized immediately. He'd felt it once before. 24 years ago, sitting in a diner booth at 2 in the morning with a cup of coffee going cold in front of him, and nowhere left to go, and a woman he'd never met coming out from behind the counter and sitting down across from him and saying without preamble, without judgment, without the careful distance that people maintain when they're not sure whether a person in front of them is dangerous. When did you last eat a real meal? He had been 22. He had been 3 weeks out of a 2-year stint for aggravated assault, which had followed a childhood he didn't talk about, and an adolescence that was mostly damage in reaction to damage. He had $40 in a duffel bag and a motorcycle that needed a new rear tire and the specific hollow feeling of a man who has run out of road in every direction. He'd told the woman he wasn't hungry. She'd brought him eggs and toast and bacon and 2 pieces of pie and a glass of milk, which he hadn't drunk since he was a child, and she set it all down in front of him and said, "This one's on Frank and me. You look like you've been carrying something heavy for a long time." He hadn't been able to answer that. He'd eaten everything. He'd come back the next day, and the next, He'd done odd jobs around the diner for 2 months, fixing the back steps, repainting the sign, unclogging the grease trap 3 times because the grease trap was a recurring crisis at the lantern table. And in those 2 months he had experienced for the first time, he could clearly remember the sensation of existing in a place where people were glad he was there. Not tolerated, not managed, not watched carefully with one eye for signs of trouble. Glad. Her name was Evelyn Harper. Her husband Frank shook his hand the first morning, like they'd already decided he was worth knowing. The regulars absorbed him without ceremony. And when he left, when the road called the way it always did, Evelyn had packed him food for 3 days and made him promise to come back when he could. He'd come back 4 more times over the years. He'd brought other people. He'd sent people. Men he rode with who needed what he'd found there, that specific combination of food and warmth and being looked at like a human being, and every single one of them had gotten exactly that. The diner closed in 2009. He'd heard through the network that Frank was sick. He'd sent money anonymously, had no idea if it helped. He'd meant to look her up after Frank passed. He hadn't. Time moved the way time does when you are living fast and not paying attention to the distances you've let grow. Now he was standing in his garage holding his phone, looking at a video of Evelyn Harper sitting behind a dumpster in the early morning cold, giving a stray dog the bigger half of her last biscuit. He set the phone down. He picked up the radio on his workbench, the old one, the one that still ran on the frequency that the original Oklahoma chapter had used since 1994, which was mostly ceremonial now, but which people still monitored because some communications were too important for group chats. He keyed it. "This is Reaper. Anyone on channel, this goes out right now. We have a situation involving a woman named Evelyn Harper, formerly of the Lantern Table on Route 9. Some of you know that name. Those who do, you know what we owe. Get on your phones. I need location and I need it fast. We move today." He released the key. For 5 seconds, silence, then the radio erupted. Damn. The first callback came from a man named Shepard, who rode out of Tulsa and had been part of a 3-state network for 15 years. Shepard was 54 and had the kind of calm that comes from having navigated enough chaos that ordinary urgency no longer affects his heart rate. "Locations confirmed," Shepard said. "Morrow Creek gas station on Highway 9. She's in transit to County General right now. I've got a brother who knows someone on the EMS team." "How is she?" Reaper asked. "A beat. She's talking, she's coherent. She gave them her blood pressure medication name dosage and prescribing doctor from memory." Shepard paused. "She asked them not to call her son." The silence on the channel had a particular quality. "The son have a name?" someone asked. "Daniel Harper," Reaper said. "That's all I've got right now." "That's enough," said a voice Reaper didn't immediately recognize. "Give me 40 minutes. "Who is this?" "My name's Tick. I met Mama Eve in 2003. She let me sleep in her storeroom for 2 weeks when I had nowhere else to go." A pause. "I do data recovery for a living now. Legal kind. You want to know about Daniel Harper? Give me 40 minutes. 30, Reaper said. 25, Tick said and disconnected. Yishajam. The hospital was a 40-minute ride from where Reaper was. He made it in 28. By the time he pulled into the parking lot, there were 11 motorcycles already there. Not parked in a cluster, not making a statement, just present, scattered across the lot, the way people spread out when they're trying not to alarm anyone, because they understood that the goal right now was not to alarm anyone. The goal right now was information. A man named Decker met him at the entrance. Decker was 61, broad-shouldered, and had a prosthetic left arm from a roadside bomb in Fallujah that he treated with complete indifference. He'd eaten at the Lantern Table 9 times over 6 years. He remembered every one. "She's stable," Decker said immediately. "Blood pressure's elevated but manageable. She's dehydrated. She's got early signs of hypothermia. She's malnourished. They're giving her fluids." She asked about the dog 3 times. "The dog?" "Stray that was with her, the paramedic kid Kevin, the one who filmed the video he took it. She made the paramedics confirm it before she let them close the ambulance doors." Reaper almost smiled. "Almost. She know we're here?" "Not yet. I didn't want to push. She went through something, Reaper." 3 days, her own son. Decker stopped, jaw tight. "I've got kids. I can't." He stopped again. "I know," Reaper said. "I want to talk to her," Decker said. "When she's ready. I want her to know that the people she helped haven't forgotten. We'll get there. Right now, I'm waiting on Tick. Tick called at 11:47. Reaper stepped away from the entrance and answered on the first ring. Talk to me. Daniel Gregory Harper, Tick said, and his voice had the flat quality of someone reporting facts that are making them feel things they'd rather not feel right now. 46 years old, commercial real estate broker based in Tulsa, married 2 kids' house in a good neighborhood, drives a $70,000 SUV. Clean record, solid reputation. The kind of guy who gets invited to things. And his mother's house, the property she's lived in for 31 years, sold 6 months ago. Quit claim deed. Her signature is on the documents. Reaper was very still. She know about it, he asked. I talked to a title attorney I know. Off the record. He says the deed transfer had irregularities. The notarization timestamps are wrong. The witness signatures are from people who can't be located, and the sale price was 40% below market. Tick exhaled. He thinks the signature was forged. The parking lot went very quiet in Reaper's perception. Where's the money? Account in Daniel Harper's name. Used a portion of it to pay off his business line of credit 2 months ago. Reaper said nothing for a long moment. There's more, Tick said. Tell me. Her prescription medications, the lisinopril she mentioned in the video, plus 2 others, the last fill on her insurance was 4 months ago. But her pharmacy records show she picked them up monthly for 11 years before that, like clockwork. Then suddenly nothing. He cut off her refills. Her insurance is linked to his account. He changed the billing address and stopped paying the premium. Her coverage lapsed and nobody told her. Tick paused. I also found 3 calls from her sister Beverly Crane, Tulsa, that went to voicemail and were never returned. The calls started 8 months ago. Beverly left a message in the last one saying she was worried because Evelyn wasn't answering the house phone. Because she didn't have a house anymore, Reaper said quietly. There's one more thing. Tick's voice dropped. This is the part He stopped, collected himself. I found a message. It was in a group chat that Daniel had with his wife. Their phones were synced to a shared cloud account. I won't say how I accessed it because the less you know, the better, but what I found, say it. 3 weeks ago, Daniel sent his wife a message. It said, if people help her, this gets complicated. She needs to look confused, not rescued. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. He planned it, Reaper said. He planned it, Tick confirmed. He needed her to look incompetent. He needed her to seem like a confused old woman who wandered off. That way, when the property transactions got questioned, if they ever did, there's a narrative. She has dementia. She doesn't know what she signed. He was just managing an unfortunate family situation. Reaper stood in the hospital parking lot and breathed carefully. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way a therapist had taught him in his 30s, and that he still used in moments when the particular feeling currently moving through his body needed somewhere to go that wasn't destruction. How many people can we get by end of day, he asked. Decker, who had been standing close enough to catch the tone, if not the words, looked up. You mean at the hospital? Tick asked. No, at the gas station. I want to be there when Daniel Harper shows up. Reaper's voice was very level. And he will show up. The video's been seen by 100,000 people by now. The story has her name in it. He'll show up to manage the narrative. He always does. How do you know that? Tick asked. Because I've known men like him my whole life, Reaper said. They don't panic. They adjust. They show up with a calm smile and a reasonable explanation, and they make everyone around them feel like they're the problem for not understanding. He paused. He'll show up. How many people do you want? Reaper thought about the lantern table. About 11 years of people who came back because they'd been given something there that they'd never gotten anywhere else. About the network, the vast, sprawling, informal web of men and women who'd ridden through that parking lot and eaten at those checkered tables and been treated like they mattered. As many as want to come, he said. He hung up. He turned to Decker. Get on the radio, he said. Full spread. Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas. Tell them Mama Eve's location and tell them what her son did. Tell them we're going to the gas station on Highway 9 and we're going to be there before Daniel Harper arrives. Decker already had his radio out. What do we do when we get there? He asked. We stand there, Reaper said. That's all. We just stand there and we let him see us. Ushar. Evelyn didn't know about any of it yet. She was in a hospital bed with an IV in her arm and a warm blanket over her legs. and she was for the first time in 4 days genuinely warm, and the combination of warmth and safety and the low hum of medical equipment doing its job was pulling her toward a sleep she'd been holding off since the moment Daniel's car disappeared. A nurse named Patricia had been checking on her every 20 minutes. Patricia was 58 and had the particular competence of someone who was seen enough to not be performatively gentle. She was just direct and kind in equal measure, and Evelyn appreciated that considerably. "Your sister's been called," Patricia told her on the second check. "She's already on the road. She'll be here in under 2 hours." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Beverly. Her baby sister, who was 76 now, and still somehow seemed younger, who had been calling and calling, and whose calls had gone somewhere to voicemail, to silence, to a son who'd managed the information the way he managed everything carefully without her consent, with an eye toward the version of the story that served him best. "How long has it been?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Since you called her, how long did she say it had been since she heard from me?" Patricia checked something on her clipboard. "She said 8 months. 8 months. Evelyn processed that. 8 months of Beverly calling and believing she was being ignored or forgotten, or that something was wrong, while Daniel intercepted and redirected and maintained control of the story. 8 months of a 76-year-old woman worrying about her sister and not knowing why her sister had gone quiet. "He told her I had dementia," Evelyn said. "It wasn't a question." Patricia looked at her carefully. She mentioned that was what she'd been told. "I don't have dementia," Evelyn said. "I know," Patricia said. "The attending knows. We've assessed you 3 times. "He's very convincing," Evelyn said, and there was nothing in her voice that sounded like it was meant to excuse Daniel. It was just a statement of fact, a clinical observation about a mechanism she'd watched operate for years. "He's been doing it a long time. It works on people because he's calm. People trust calm. They mistake it for honesty." Patricia sat down in the chair beside the bed. She didn't do this with patients usually. She was busy. She had 12 other rooms. But something about Evelyn Harper made her sit down. "Can I ask you something?" Patricia said. "Yes." "The video, the one the young man posted, I've seen it. Everyone here has seen it." She paused. "You gave the dog the bigger piece of food." Evelyn looked at her. "Why, Patricia asked. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "Because I knew someone would come for me eventually," she said. "I didn't know who. I didn't know when. But I've lived long enough to know that kindness accumulates. You put it out in the world for 30 years, and you don't know where it goes, but it goes somewhere, and somewhere down the road, sometimes a very long road, it finds its way back." She smoothed the blanket over her knees with one careful hand. "The dog didn't have that knowledge. The dog just had me, so the dog got the bigger piece." Patricia sat with that for a moment. "You really believe that?" she asked. "After what your son did," Evelyn looked at the window. "I believe it more," she said quietly, "because of what my son did. Because if the only love I'd ever put in the world was the love I gave to Daniel, and this was what came back, well, that would be a terrible ledger." She turned back to Patricia. "But I put so much more than that out there. So much more. And I have to trust that it's still out there, still moving." Patricia stood up. Her eyes were bright in a way she'd prefer not to acknowledge on the record. "Get some rest," she said. "Your sister's coming." Outside the hospital, the parking lot was filling up. Not quickly, not with noise or display. Just steadily, the way water fills a vessel. One arrival, then another, then another. Each one quiet and purposeful and carrying a particular expression that the nurses and security staff found difficult to categorize because it wasn't aggression, and it wasn't grief, and it wasn't quite either of the things they usually prepared for. It was something more like resolve. Decker counted them from the entrance. 37 at 2 in the afternoon. 62 by 3. His radio crackled every few minutes more on the way. A chapter from Lawton. A group from Wichita that had heard through a Facebook post and driven 3 hours without being asked. A man named Grady, who was 71 and had eaten at the Lantern Table in 1998 and had told the story of it to anyone who'd listened for the 26 years since. Reaper stood in the center of it and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not exactly grief, not exactly joy, but the complicated convergence of both that happens when something lost turns out not to have been fully lost after all. He'd asked around during the day. Asked the people arriving what they remembered about the lantern table, about Mama Eve, about the particular thing she'd given them that had stayed. The answers were different every time and all the same. She gave me boots when I was 16 and homeless and had walked 40 miles in shoes that were falling apart. She hid my kids in her back kitchen for 2 nights when my ex-husband came looking for us with a temper and a car. She sat with me for 3 hours after my first deployment when I couldn't stop shaking and didn't know what was wrong with me, and she never once made me feel crazy for it. She called me son. She called me son, and she meant it, and nobody had ever meant it before. She opened at 5 a.m. on Christmas Day one year because she knew some of us had nowhere to go, and she made a full breakfast and charged nothing and didn't make it a big thing. She just opened the door. Reaper listened to all of it. Every story landed in the same place, that specific register of she saw me when I was invisible. And it became increasingly clear to him as the afternoon passed that Evelyn Harper had not merely fed people. She had done something rarer and more essential than that. She had made people believe in the most practical and undramatic and down-to-earth possible way that they deserved to be fed. And her son had left her behind a dumpster with one stale biscuit. At 4:17 p.m. Reaper's phone rang. He didn't recognize the number. He answered anyway. "This is Reaper." "You don't know me," said the voice on the other end. Male, controlled, smooth in the way of someone who'd practiced being smooth. "My name is Daniel Harper. I'm Evelyn Harper's son. I understand there are a number of individuals gathering at the location of my mother's recent incident. I wanted to reach out directly and clarify some things before the situation gets out of hand." Reaper said nothing. He waited. The silence didn't seem to unsettle Daniel Harper at all. "My mother has been experiencing cognitive decline for several years," Daniel continued. "She wanders. She gets confused. She doesn't always remember conversations she's had or decisions she's made. What happened at the gas station was a tragic miscommunication. She became disoriented and left the vehicle before I realized what was happening. And by the time I was able to—" "Where did you go?" Reaper asked. A pause, barely perceptible. "I'm sorry." "When she got out of the car, where did you go? What errand were you running that kept you away for 3 days while your 81-year-old mother with dementia, your words, sat behind a dumpster?" The pause this time was longer. "There were some complications. A family emergency that—" "What's the address of the house she's been living in for the past 6 months?" Reaper said. "Since you sold the one she owned." Complete silence. "Because from where I'm standing," Reaper said, and his voice was so calm it was almost tranquil, "it looks like there isn't one. It looks like you sold her house using documents that a title attorney I spoke to today thinks have serious problems. It looks like you cut off her medication. It looks like you told her sister she had dementia so nobody would go looking for her. I don't know who you... And it looks like 3 weeks ago you sent your wife a message saying you needed her to look confused, not rescued." Reaper let that sit for 2 full seconds. "So I'm going to ask you one more time, and I'd like an honest answer. Where did you go?" The call ended. Daniel Harper hung up. Reaper lowered the phone and looked at it for a moment. Then he turned to Decker. "He's coming," he said. Decker looked at the parking lot, at the rows of motorcycles, at the men and women who had driven hours to be here. "How many do we have?" Reaper looked around. He thought about the radio calls still coming in, the chapters driving through the afternoon, the people who hadn't seen Evelyn in decades and were driving anyway because some debts don't expire. "Not enough yet," he said, "but by tomorrow morning." He looked toward the highway. The sound was faint at first, then it wasn't. Coming from the west, then from the north, then from both directions at once, the low collective rumble of engines growing steadily, the way a storm sounds when it's still far away, but you already know it's going to be enormous. Decker's radio crackled. A voice said, "This is Shepard. I've got 68 riders behind me. 20 minutes out. Anyone else on channel, sound off." 12 voices sounded off. Reaper stood in the parking lot and listened to the sound getting closer and closer. And somewhere in that hospital behind him, Evelyn Harper was sleeping for the first time in 4 days, and she didn't know yet what was coming. Didn't know that the kindness she'd sent out into the world 30 years ago was returning to her now, with engines and leather and the particular loyalty of people who have been given something they never forgot and have been waiting without knowing they were waiting for the chance to give it back. The rumble grew and grew. and didn't stop. The sound reached the gas station before the riders did. It rolled across the flat Oklahoma highway like something with weight and intention, and the people who had gathered in the Morrow Creek parking lot, a handful of locals, two news vans that had arrived an hour earlier, a county deputy named Walsh who'd been called to manage the situation and was now standing beside his cruiser, reconsidering what manage was going to mean in practical terms. All of them stopped talking and turned toward the sound at the same moment. Kevin Marsh stood near the back corner of the building in the same spot where he'd found Evelyn 4 mornings ago with Red pressed against his left leg. He'd been asked twice by the news crews for an interview. He declined both times. He didn't think the story was about him, and he didn't want to make it about him, but he also wasn't going to leave because this place felt like his responsibility in a way he couldn't articulate but couldn't ignore. He felt the vibration through his feet before he actually saw the first headlights. Then the first riders crested the highway, then 50 more behind them, then 50 behind those. Deputy Walsh took off his hat, looked at what was coming down Highway 9 and put his hat back on. He keyed his radio and said very evenly, "Dispatch, I'm going to need a supervisor out here." And then he straightened his belt and planted his feet because whatever was about to happen, he decided he was going to face it standing up straight. By the time the last motorcycle rolled into position, there were 193 riders. Not 200, 193, a number that Decker would later confirm because Decker counted things and the precision mattered to him. They lined the highway on both sides. They filled the parking lot. They sat on their bikes or stood beside them with their helmets in their hands, and they did not cheer and they did not rev their engines and they did not perform for the 2 news cameras that were now recording frantically. They were just there, all of them quiet, all of them facing the same direction. Reaper Cole stood at the front. He had his arms crossed and his jaw set and his eyes on the highway, and the scar along his jaw was pale against his skin in the late afternoon light. And the people around him, men who'd ridden 10,000 miles between them, men who'd seen things and done things and survived things, gave him space in the specific way that people give space to someone they trust to know what comes next. He didn't look angry, he looked resolved. There is a significant difference between those two things and the people watching. The deputy, the news crew's Kevin, with his tusk at the corner of the building, all felt it, though not all of them could have named it. The black SUV turned off the highway at 5:03 p.m. Daniel Harper had driven 2 hours telling himself the story he'd been rehearsing since he saw the video. Cognitive decline, wandering episodes. A family that loved her and was doing their best in a difficult situation. Opportunistic strangers exploiting a vulnerable elderly woman for social media attention. A son who was heartbroken that it had come to this. He was good at the story. He'd told versions of it to Beverly, to the neighbors, to 2 of Evelyn's doctors who'd expressed concern over the past year. He'd told it so many times and with such consistent detail that there were moments, brief sliding moments, when he almost believed it himself. He'd put on a good jacket, not the expensive one. The expensive one read wrong, he'd decided. He wanted to look like a concerned son, not a wealthy man. He wanted to look tired. He wanted to look like someone who'd been through something. He'd practiced the expression in the rearview mirror for the last 20 minutes of the drive. He did not expect 193 motorcycles. The SUV slowed. He could see the news vans. He could see the deputy. He could see the rows of riders stretching back along both sides of the highway, all of them facing him, all of them still. His wife, seated beside him, said nothing. She'd been saying nothing for most of the drive, which was its own kind of verdict. "Stay in the car," Daniel said. "Daniel." "I said stay in the car." His voice had the sharp edge that appeared when the managed calm wasn't quite managed enough. He caught it, smoothed it. "I'll handle this. 5 minutes." He got out. He walked toward the parking lot with his hands visible and his shoulders back, and the expression he'd practiced concerned steady, heartbroken, already in place. Reaper watched him come. He didn't move. He let Daniel cross the full distance of the parking lot, let him pass the news cameras, let him get close enough to see faces before he said anything. Daniel stopped 8 feet away. "I want to see my mother," he said. His voice was exactly right. Calm, reasonable, tinged with something that sounded very much like worry. "Your mother's in the hospital," Reaper said. "I'm aware. I'd like to—" "You've been aware for how long?" Daniel blinked. Just once. The blink of a man recalibrating. "I'm sorry. The video was posted yesterday morning. 160,000 shares by last night. Your mother's name is in the title. Reaper's voice was still level, conversational almost. You had a long time to come. You came now. I'm asking how long you've been aware. I don't think that's relevant to. I called you, Kevin said. Everyone turned. Kevin Marsh was walking across the parking lot, red at his heel phone in his hand. He was 23 and visibly nervous and walking toward this anyway, which took more courage than most of the people watching would have credited him for. I called the number the gas station owner had on file for you, Kevin said. That was yesterday at 6 a.m., right after I called 911. He stopped beside Reaper. You didn't answer, you didn't call back. Daniel looked at Kevin. Something behind his eyes made a small adjustment. He was filing Kevin away, recategorizing him from bystander to complication. I don't recognize your number, Daniel said. I get a lot of calls. I left a voicemail, Kevin said. I said your mother was behind Morrow Creek gas station and that paramedics were with her and that she'd been there for 3 days. I didn't receive. I have the timestamp, Kevin said. I have the read receipt. Your voicemail system sent a confirmation that the message was listened to at 6:14 a.m. yesterday. The parking lot was very quiet. Daniel Harper stood in the middle of it with 193 people looking at him and 2 cameras rolling and a 23-year-old kid holding a phone with a voicemail timestamp on it, and the expression he'd practiced in the rearview mirror shifted barely perceptibly into something that required more maintenance to hold in place. I listened to the voicemail, he said carefully. I was in the middle of a family situation. I was going to come as soon as I... What family situation? Reaper asked. That's a private. More private than your mother sitting behind a dumpster. A murmur moved through the crowd, not loud, just present the way a current is present underwater. Daniel turned to the deputy. Officer, I'd appreciate some assistance here. I'm being prevented from reaching my mother. Your mother is at County General, Deputy Walsh said. She's receiving treatment. Nobody's preventing you from going there. He paused. These folks aren't breaking any laws that I can identify. Daniel turned back. His eyes moved across the crowd, across the rows of riders, across a Kevin, across the news cameras, and something in his expression changed again. Not dramatically. But Reaper caught it because Reaper had been reading men like Daniel Harper since he was a teenager, and he knew the precise moment when a man who has been managing a situation realizes the situation has grown larger than his management capacity. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Daniel said. His voice was still steady. Credit where it was due, the man was composed. My mother has been experiencing serious cognitive decline. The things she may have told people, the narratives that have been shared on social media, they're not accurate. She constructs stories. She believes them fully, but they're not. She gave me her blood pressure medication, name dosage, prescribing doctor, and pharmacy from memory, Kevin said. That kind of rote recall is actually common in early stage. She told me her husband Frank's middle name, their wedding anniversary, the year they opened the lantern table and the number of seats it had at opening. Kevin continued, she told me her sister Beverly's phone number, including area code, without hesitating. Kevin. Reaper said it quietly, not to stop him, but to let him know he had support. Kevin stood a little straighter. She remembered every single person who walked past her in 3 days, and what each one said, word for word. His voice was doing something he couldn't entirely control, a slight vibration of anger, working its way through the steadiness. But he kept going. She doesn't have dementia, and I think you know that. Daniel Harper looked at Kevin Marsh for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, so that only the people closest could hear, you're going to regret inserting yourself into this. Reaper took one step forward. Just one. Daniel's eyes moved to him and stayed there. Say that again, Reaper said. Bach. The deputy stepped between them before anything else happened, which was exactly the right move, and Walsh made it cleanly, positioning himself with the particular practiced neutrality of a man who didn't know yet whose side he was on, but knew that nobody was well served by the situation escalating in a parking lot in front of 2 news cameras. Gentlemen, Walsh said, let's all take a breath. Daniel took the breath. He was recalculating. Reaper could see it, the rapid internal reassessment of someone who has walked into a situation expecting one kind of resistance and found another kind entirely. He'd expected emotion. Bikers being loud, being performative, giving him something he could dismiss or work around. He hadn't expected Kevin with timestamps. He hadn't expected the controlled quiet of 193 people who weren't performing anything. "I'd like to speak with whoever is in charge here," Daniel said to the deputy. "Nobody's in charge here," Walsh said. "These are private citizens on public property. I can't tell them to leave." "Then I'd like to speak to someone from the news crew. I have a statement." "Mr. Harper." The voice came from the edge of the crowd. A woman, mid-40s. She was holding a phone but not recording. She'd lowered it deliberately, which was how Reaper knew she was about to say something she'd decided to say rather than capture. Her name was Joanna Reese, and she'd driven 4 hours from Amarillo because in 2006, Evelyn Harper had hidden her and her 2 daughters in the Lantern Table kitchen for 6 hours, while Joanna's then-husband drove up and down Route 9 looking for them after she'd finally gotten the nerve to leave. "I have a question," Joanna said. Daniel looked at her. Polite, managed. "Go ahead," he said. "Where does your mother live?" Joanna asked. "Right now, where is her home?" The silence that followed had a specific quality. Not empty silence, full silence. The kind that forms around a question that everyone present already knows the answer to, waiting for the person who needs to answer it. Daniel said nothing for 3 full seconds. "She's been in a transitional living arrangement while The house on Millbrook Road sold 6 months ago," Joanna said. "The house she lived in for 31 years. Where was she living after that?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's a private family. Where was she living, Mr. Harper?" The news cameras had moved closer. Walsh was watching Daniel now with an expression that had shifted subtly, the shift of a man who came in neutral and is starting to have opinions. "I need to speak to an attorney before I answer any further." "That's your answer," Reaper said. He turned away from Daniel and addressed the crowd, not grandstanding, not performing, just speaking clearly to the people who'd driven hours to be there. "I want to read something," he said. He pulled out his phone. 3 weeks ago, Daniel Harper sent his wife a text message. "I'm going to read it word for word." He looked at his screen. Quote, "If people help her, this gets complicated. She needs to look confused, not rescued." End quote. The sound that moved through the crowd was not loud. It was the sound of people absorbing something that confirmed what they'd already suspected and finding that confirmation worse, not better than the suspicion. A man named Grady, 71 years old, had driven from Lawton, made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Joanna Reese pressed her hand over her mouth. Kevin stared at the ground. Daniel Harper's composure, the careful, maintained, practiced composure that had served him for years in situations considerably less extreme than this one, cracked. Not completely. Not all at once. A single fracture line visible in the way his eyes moved, in the way his weight shifted backward by a fraction of an inch, in the precise moment when the story he told himself stopped being sufficient to the reality in front of him. "That's taken out of context," he said. "What's the context?" Reaper asked. No answer. What is the context in which she needs to look confused, not rescued, doesn't mean what it clearly means. Daniel turned to the deputy. "I want to file a report," he said. "This man is in possession of private communications obtained illegally." "I'd focus less on how we got it," Reaper said, "and more on what it says." Walsh was on his radio, not loudly, but Reaper caught the words requesting Detective Unit Morrow Creek Highway 9, possible elder abuse situation, multiple witnesses present. Daniel heard it too. For the first time since he'd gotten out of the SUV, something moved across his face that wasn't managed at all. Inside the gas station, Ray was watching through the window. He'd been watching since the first motorcycles arrived, standing at the back of the store with his arms folded and his stomach in his throat, watching the parking lot fill up, and knowing with the certainty of a man who has done a bad thing and been waiting for it to find him, that whatever was happening out there was going to eventually happen in here. He'd been paid $200. He'd told himself it was nothing serious, a family matter. The son had explained it so reasonably. Cognitive decline, wandering episodes. We just need a day to get the paperwork sorted and then we'll come get her. Don't engage, don't call anyone, just give us a day. $200. He'd watched Evelyn knock on the window. He'd watched her try the door. He'd watched her go around back. He'd stood in the store and let her be out there in the October cold for 3 days, while he told himself it wasn't his problem and he hadn't done anything wrong and the family was handling it. Now there were 193 motorcycles in his parking lot and a detective unit on the way, and the thing he'd told himself wasn't his problem had become clearly and unavoidably partly his problem. He went outside. He walked to where Deputy Walsh was standing. He said, "I need to tell you something." Walsh looked at him. "I was paid," Ray said. His voice was low. He wasn't looking at Daniel. Harper couldn't look at him. $200. He called the owner first and the owner called me. He said to ignore the woman, don't call anyone, don't let her use the phone. He said she had dementia and the family was handling it. Ray stopped, breathed. I knew by the second day she wasn't confused. She talked to me once through the window and she was completely clear. She asked me to call her sister. I didn't do it. Walsh was writing. She asked me to call her sister, Ray said again, and this time there was nothing left in his voice that sounded like self-defense. And I didn't do it. Kevin, who had been standing close enough to hear, turned away. He didn't say anything to Ray. There was nothing to say that the situation hadn't already said with much more force than anything he could add. He crouched down and put his hand on Red's back. The dog leaned into him. The detective arrived at 6:12 p.m. Her name was Sandra Okafor, and she was 43, and she'd been working elder abuse cases for 6 of her 19 years on the force, which meant she'd developed both an efficient methodology and a very specific kind of fatigue that came from doing necessary work in an area that most people preferred not to think about. She pulled into the parking lot, took in the scene 100-plus motorcycles, 2 news vans, a man in a good jacket, standing near a deputy with the contained energy of someone trying very hard not to run, and walked directly to Walsh. Walsh briefed her in 4 minutes. He was good at briefing. She listened. She looked at Daniel once. Then she looked at Kevin, who handed her his phone with the voicemail timestamp in the video and the screenshot of Daniel's text message that Tick had sent Reaper and Reaper had sent Kevin, because Kevin was the one with clean hands and provable first contact. She reviewed everything without expression. Then she walked to Daniel Harper. "Mr. Harper, I'm Detective Okafor. I'd like to ask you some questions about your mother's living situation over the past 6 months." She held up a hand before he could speak. "You're not under arrest. You're not required to answer. But I'd encourage you to understand that I'm going to find out the answers regardless, and how you respond right now will be relevant to how this proceeding develops." Daniel Harper looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I'd like to call my attorney." "Absolutely," Okafor said. "You can do that right now." She gestured toward her car. "I'll wait." He walked to her car and got in the passenger seat and made the call, and the whole parking lot watched him through the window, watched him talk, watched his free hand move through the gestures of someone explaining something urgent to someone who is not yet fully understanding the urgency, and the watching had a quality that wasn't satisfaction and wasn't revenge. It was closer to witness. The act of being present for the moment when a person who has operated in darkness is made to exist in the light. Reaper walked around to the back of the building. He stood in the narrow strip where Evelyn had sat for 3 days. He looked at the wall, at the cracked asphalt, at the dumpster that still smelled like it smelled. He tried to put himself in it. 3 days, 81 years old, no medication, no phone. The specific betrayal of being left here by the person whose existence you had chosen to dedicate the better part of your life to. He couldn't fully get there. Some experiences are sealed, and the most you can do is stand at the edge of them and acknowledge the depth. He looked at the ground. There was still a small indentation in the dust near the wall where she'd sat, the impression left by a person who'd been there long enough to leave a mark even in the places nobody was supposed to see. He thought about the photograph in her breast pocket, the one she'd kept through 3 days of this. The lantern table, Frank with his big handshake, the regulars who'd become something closer to family than the word regulars usually implies. The specific, irreplicable atmosphere of a place where people felt safe being exactly what they were. His phone rang. He answered without looking at it. "This is Reaper." "It's Tick. What have you got?" "More." Tick's voice was tight. "I've been going through financial records, cross-referencing the property sale, the insurance lapse, some account movements. There's a pattern going back further than 6 months." He paused. "Reaper, he's been doing this systematically for 2 years. Small things at first, redirecting her mail, managing her banking access, isolating her from people who might question him. It escalated when he needed capital for a business investment that went bad. He needed her house. He needed everything she had, and he'd already spent it. Another pause. There's also a life insurance policy. Evelyn is the insured. Daniel is the sole beneficiary, taken out 11 months ago. The signature is you can look at it and decide for yourself. The air in the narrow strip behind the dumpster went cold. Send it to Okafor, Reaper said. Send all of it. You have her contact. I'll find it. Tick. Reaper stopped. He was looking at the indentation in the dust. You did good work today. A silence. She gave me a job reference once, Tick said. I was 27 and just getting clean and nobody would hire me. She wrote me a reference on lantern table letterhead and signed it Evelyn Harper, community member. Not employer, not boss, community member. Like we were equals. His voice shifted. I got the job. I've had good work for 15 years. He stopped. Nobody should have to earn being helped by somebody that gave that much. Reaper said nothing. There was nothing to say to that except yes, and yes wasn't adequate. He hung up and walked back around to the front. Daniel Harper got out of Okafor's car at 6:44 p.m. His attorney was on the phone but could not be there for another hour minimum. He'd been advised to say nothing further. He had the specific expression of a man who has just been told the perimeter of his situation by someone who knows it better than he does. He walked to the SUV. His wife was still inside. He opened the driver's door. And Okafor said clearly from 15 feet away, Mr. Harper, I'm going to need you to stay on the property until my colleague arrives. He stopped. You said I'm not under arrest. You're not, but I've received additional information in the last 10 minutes that I need to ask you about, and I'd prefer not to have to make another call. Okafor's voice was absolutely even. Please close the car door and wait. Daniel Harper stood with his hand on the door. He looked at the parking lot, at the rows of riders, at the cameras, at Kevin with the dog, at Ray, standing near the entrance with the look of a man who has already said what he needs to say and will say it again under oath. He looked at Reaper. Reaper was looking back, not threatening, not performing, just watching, with the specific attention of someone who has decided that whatever happens next, he is going to see it clearly and not look away. Daniel closed the car door. He walked to Okafor's car and leaned against the hood and folded his arms and stared at the highway with the expression of a man whose story has run out. Okafor looked at Reaper. He nodded once. She nodded back. Across the parking lot, one of the news reporters said something into her camera about an emerging picture of systematic financial exploitation and deliberate isolation of a vulnerable elderly woman, and the words landed in the cooling evening air with the weight of something that could not now be unsaid. The second detective arrived at 7:01 p.m. He got out of his car and walked to Okafor, and she handed him a folder. The documents Tick had sent printed at the station house by a dispatcher. Okafor had called on the drive-in, and he opened it and read the first page and looked up at Daniel Harper with an expression that was fully professional and contained nothing warm. Mr. Harper, he said, we need to talk about a property transaction. The cameras caught it all, every word. And in a hospital room 40 minutes away, a nurse named Patricia was watching the news on a small screen mounted above the bed of a sleeping woman, and she reached up and turned the volume down so it wouldn't wake her, and she sat in the chair beside the bed and watched the parking lot footage in silence. On the screen, 193 people stood in the dark, still there, not going anywhere. Patricia looked at Evelyn's face in the low light of the hospital room, the deep recovered sleep of someone whose body had finally been allowed to stop fighting, and she thought about what Evelyn had said that afternoon. Kindness accumulates. You put it out in the world and you don't know where it goes, but it goes somewhere, and somewhere down the road it finds its way back. Patricia had been a nurse for 14 years. She'd heard a lot of things people said in hospital beds. She'd never heard anyone say something in a hospital bed that she then watched prove itself true on television 2 hours later. She reached over and adjusted Evelyn's blanket. Outside the window somewhere in the Oklahoma dark, the sound of engines moved across the highway and didn't stop. Beverly Crane drove the way she always drove when something was wrong, both hands on the wheel, radio off, jaw set in the particular way their mother used to call the Harper stubborn, which was ironic now in ways Beverly didn't have the bandwidth to examine. She'd been on the road since the moment Patricia called. She hadn't packed a bag. She hadn't changed her shoes. She'd grabbed her purse and her keys, and she'd left her house in Tulsa with the door unlocked because the door didn't matter, and nothing in that house mattered. And the only thing in the world that mattered right now was the 81-year-old woman in a hospital bed 40 minutes away who had been missing from her life for 8 months, while Beverly left voicemails into silence and told herself Evelyn was fine. Probably fine, just busy, just a little distant, the way old people sometimes got. She'd told herself that lie for 8 months. She'd half believed it because Daniel had been so calm, so reassuring. Mom's doing well, Aunt Beverly. She's just taken some time. You know how she gets. And Beverly had said, yes, yes, I know. And she'd put down the phone and felt the uncomfortable shape of something not right and then gone about her day. Because what else do you do when the person managing the information is someone you've known since he was 6 years old and you've never had specific cause to distrust? She pulled into the hospital parking lot at 7:38 p.m. She was out of the car before it fully stopped rocking. Dang. Patricia met her at the elevator. She's awake, Patricia said immediately because she could see what Beverly needed to know before anything else. She's been awake for about an hour. She's stable. Blood pressure is coming down. She ate something. Beverly's whole body released about 2 inches of tension. Can I? Yes, she's been asking for you. Beverly stopped walking. She's been asking for me. Since she woke up, Patricia said, about every 20 minutes. Beverly Crane was 76 years old and had not cried in a hospital hallway since the night Frank Harper died, and she was not going to cry in a hospital hallway now, except that she was apparently going to do exactly that, and there was nothing to be done about it. Patricia handed her a tissue with the quiet efficiency of someone who keeps tissues accessible for this reason. Take a minute, Patricia said. She's not going anywhere. I'm fine, Beverly said and wiped her eyes and walked down the hallway. She pushed open the door. Evelyn looked up from the bed. For a moment, neither of them said anything. 76 and 81 sisters who had known each other their entire lives, standing in the particular silence of people who have been separated by something terrible and are now in the same room again and don't yet have language for the relief. Then Beverly said, "You look terrible." And Evelyn said, "You drove here in your gardening shoes." And Beverly looked down, and she was in fact wearing the old canvas shoes she wore when she worked in the garden. And she laughed a short, unsteady laugh and crossed the room and took her sister's hand and held it with both of hers and didn't let go. 8 months, Beverly said. Her voice was steady, but only just. 8 months, Evelyn. I called and called. I know, Evelyn said. I didn't know you were calling. I want you to understand that. I didn't know. I know that now. He told you I had dementia. It wasn't a question, but Beverly answered it anyway. He said you were declining, that you got confused, that it was better to let you rest and not overstimulate you. She stopped. I believed him. I don't know how to. Oh, you believed him because he's been practicing that story for a long time, Evelyn said. And because you loved him too once. We both did. She squeezed Beverly's hand once firmly. That's not a failure of yours. Don't make it one. Beverly sat in the chair beside the bed and held her sister's hand, and they were quiet together for a minute, the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. Then Evelyn said, "Tell me what's happening at the gas station." Beverly looked up. Patricia said there were bikers. Tell me everything. Evelyn said, I want to know all of it. Pshang. She heard it in stages. Beverly told her what she knew from Patricia, who had been watching the news. Patricia came in and told her what the news crews were reporting. Then Kevin arrived. Patricia had called him because Evelyn had asked for him specifically, and he came with Red on a leash. And the dog jumped onto the foot of the bed with complete confidence before anyone could stop it. And Evelyn put her hand on the dog's back and said, "Good boy." And Kevin sat in the second chair and told her everything else. He told it straight. He didn't soften it or manage it. He'd learned in the past 24 hours that Evelyn Harper didn't need things softened and was better served by the truth than by someone's well-intentioned edit of it. He told her about Reaper Cole, about the video reaching 47,000 shares in 12 hours, about the radio call going out across 3 states, about 193 motorcycles on Highway 9. He told her about Tick and the financial records. He told her about the property sale. He told her about the insurance policy. He watched her face as he said it. He'd been nervous about this part, nervous about what the insurance policy in particular would do to her, the specific cruelty of that detail, the implication that her son had been thinking about her not as a person to be managed, but as an asset to be eventually collected. Evelyn listened without expression. When Kevin finished, she was quiet for a moment. The life insurance policy, she said finally. Yes. He took it out 11 months ago. Yes, another silence. That means, Evelyn said slowly, carefully, as if she were working through the logic in real time, even though her face suggested she'd already arrived at the conclusion and was just confirming it. That everything he did, the house, the medication isolating me from Beverly, leaving me at the station, all of it started after he took out that policy. That's what Detective Okafor believes, Kevin said. He needed me to be gone, Evelyn said. Not just inconvenient, gone. The word landed in the hospital room with its full weight. Beverly made a sound. Kevin said nothing. Red pressed harder against Evelyn's hand. She sat with the full enormity of what her son had been building toward the patient, systematic architecture of it. 2 years of small moves, redirected male-managed narratives. A house sold out from under her medication. Cut off a sister kept at a distance. A gas station attendant paid $200 to look away, all of it, moving in one direction. She sat with it for a long time. Then she said very quietly, he was so small when he was born. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. He had Frank's ears. He cried for the first 3 weeks every night, and I never once put him down while he was crying because I didn't want him to think he was alone in the world. Nobody said anything. I raised him to know he was loved, Evelyn said. I made sure every single day. Not because it was easy, Lord knows there were days it wasn't easy, but because I believed that if a child knew he was loved without condition, he would become a person capable of loving without condition. She stopped. I was wrong about that. Or maybe I wasn't wrong about the principle and something else went sideways. I don't know. I may never know. She looked at Kevin. The bikers, she said, they're still there. Last I heard, Kevin said, they're not leaving until he stopped. Until they know you're okay. Evelyn looked at the window for a long moment. I want to see them, she said. Beverly leaned forward. Evelyn, I know what Evelyn said firmly. I've been in this bed for the better part of a day, and I'm warm, and I'm medicated, and I'm ready to stand up. She looked at Patricia, who had appeared in the doorway at some point, and was listening. Can I be discharged tomorrow morning? Patricia looked at her carefully. That would be up to the attending. I'm going to ask him, Evelyn said. But before that, tomorrow morning, before discharge, I want to go outside. She paused. I've heard there are people who came a long way. But Patricia said, let me see what I can do. Oh yeah. Daniel Harper was taken in for formal questioning at 8:15 p.m. Not arrested, not yet. But the distinction between voluntarily accompanying detectives and arrested was at that point largely semantic, and everyone present, Daniel, his attorney, who'd finally arrived, Okafor, and the second detective, whose name was Marcus Webb, understood that. The documentation Tick had assembled was, as Webb told Okafor quietly in the parking lot before they went in, enough to start with, which in detective language meant enough to apply significant pressure and see what pressure produces. What it produced in the first 40 minutes of questioning was a man who had spent 2 years being the smartest person in every room he walked into, suddenly finding himself in a room where that wasn't true. Okafor asked about this property sale. Daniel's attorney advised him not to answer. Okafor asked about the insurance policy. Same response. Okafor asked about the text message. She needs to look confused, not rescued, and set her phone on the table with the message visible on the screen and watch Daniel's eyes move to it and then away and then back the way eyes do when they're looking at something they'd like to unsee. Who wrote this? Okafor asked. Daniel's attorney said, my client. I'm asking your client, Okafor said pleasantly. Daniel looked at the message. I'd like to understand the context you believe that exists, and he said There's no context I'm proposing, Okafor said. I'm asking who wrote it. Silence. Because we have confirmation from the cell carrier that it originated from the number registered to you, Okafor continued, and the delivery timestamp matches a period when, according to your wife's phone, she was in the same room and her phone received it. She leaned forward slightly. So I'm going to ask one more time. Did you write this message? Daniel Harper looked at his attorney. His attorney, whose expression had been professionally neutral for the past 40 minutes, gave the smallest possible movement of his head. Daniel said nothing. Okafor sat back. Let me tell you what we're building, she said, and her voice was calm in the way that is more frightening than anger. We have a forged property transfer. We have an insurance policy taken out 11 months ago, the same month that neighbors later told us they stopped seeing your mother at her own house regularly. We have a deliberate lapse of her medical coverage. We have a paid witness who will testify that you specifically instructed him to prevent her from getting help. We have phone records showing you received a voicemail about her location and listened to it and didn't respond for 22 hours. She paused. And we have this message which tells us that none of this was confusion or negligence or a family situation that got complicated. It tells us this was planned. She looked at him steadily. Elder abuse, Mr. Harper, is a felony in this state. Medicaid fraud for the insurance lapse adds a federal layer. Forgery adds another. And depending on what a prosecutor decides about the insurance policy and your intent regarding your mother's disappearance, we may be looking at something considerably more serious than all of that. The room was quiet. Daniel Harper sat across the table from a detective who had been doing this for 19 years and had run out of patience for the performance of reasonable men doing unreasonable things. And for the first time in his adult life, the story he'd been telling didn't have an audience that was going to believe it. His attorney put a hand on his arm. We're done for tonight, the attorney said. Sit, Okafor said pleasantly. We're not done for tonight. Reaper got the call at 9:47 p.m. He'd been in the hospital parking lot for 2 hours by then. Not in Evelyn's room, hadn't asked to go up, understood that there were people who needed to be with her who had a different kind of claim than his. He was just there, present, the same way the rest of them were there, scattered through the parking lot and along the highway's shoulder, not making a production of it, just unwilling to leave until they knew the full shape of the situation. The call was from Kevin. She knows everything, Kevin said. She wants to come outside tomorrow morning before discharge. Reaper was quiet for a moment. She knows we're here. She knows all of it. The writers, Tick's research, Daniel, all of it. Kevin paused. She asked me to tell you something. Tell me. She said. Kevin stopped, cleared his throat. She said she remembers a young man who came into the lantern table in the winter of 2001 and worked odd jobs for 2 months and couldn't look Frank in the eye at first, but by the end he could. A pause. She said she never forgot him. She said she hoped he turned out okay. Reaper stood in the parking lot and looked at the sky. Oklahoma sky, vast and dark and entirely indifferent to the things happening under it, which somehow made it easier to feel them clearly. Tell her he turned out okay, he said. She said she knew that already, Kevin said. She said she could tell from the parking lot. Reaper laughed a short, real laugh, the kind that catches you off guard because you weren't prepared for it. Tell everyone to be here at 9 tomorrow morning, he said. Everyone who wants to be. And tell them, he stopped. Thought. Tell them we form up quiet, 2 lines from the entrance to wherever they bring her out. Nobody cheers. Nobody makes a speech. We just stand there and let her walk through. She's not going to make it without crying, Kevin said. That's okay, Reaper said. Neither are most of us. Oshamheim. The morning came clear. Evelyn woke before 6. She lay in the hospital bed for a while and listened to the building. The particular sounds of a place that runs continuously through the night. The soft percussion of a place where people are being kept alive and sometimes failing to be kept alive and sometimes astonishing everyone by surviving and all of it happening in the same building at the same time. She thought about Frank. She did this every morning, had done it every morning since he died. Not grief exactly, she'd moved through grief in the years following his death and come out the other side into something that wasn't grief but was adjacent to it, a kind of permanent warmth with a cool edge. She thought about him the way you think about a place you loved that no longer exists, not with the pain of loss, but with the specific gratitude of having been there. She thought about the lantern table. She thought about the mornings she'd opened before 5 because there were always people who came before the sun, did truckers finishing night runs, veterans who didn't sleep well, the occasional local who'd had a bad night and needed coffee, and the specific comfort of a place that was warm and asked nothing of them. She thought about the young man in the winter of 2001, the one with the scar along his jaw, who couldn't look Frank in the eye, and spent 2 months fixing things that needed fixing and left without enough of a goodbye because goodbyes were hard for him. She'd watched him ride away and wondered the way she always did when people left, whether she'd given him enough of something that would last. She knew the answer now. Patricia came in at 7 with fresh clothes. Beverly had gone out at 6 a.m. and come back with a bag from a department store, sensible items Evelyn's sizes guessed accurately because sisters know these things even after 8 months of silence. "How do you feel?" Patricia asked. "Like I want to get up," Evelyn said. "Then let's get you up." The attending physician had signed the discharge paperwork the previous night with 2 conditions. Evelyn would follow up with her own doctor within 48 hours, and she would not stand in any cold air for longer than 15 minutes. He had also written in the margin of her chart in handwriting that Patricia would later describe as unusually personal for a discharge note. Patient demonstrates exceptional cognitive clarity and emotional resilience. Remarkable woman. Beverly helped her dress. Evelyn moved slowly. Her body was still recalibrating, still catching up to the warmth and food and medication that it had been denied. But she moved steadily with the particular deliberateness of someone who has decided that every step they take today is going to be on their own terms. She kept the photograph in her breast pocket. Beverly said nothing about it. At 8:53 a.m., Kevin texted Reaper. "She's coming down in about 10 minutes. The parking lot had been filling since 8. They came back the way they'd come the night before, quiet, purposeful, in ones and twos and small groups, motorcycles pulling in, without fanfare riders getting off and taking their places without being directed because Reaper had told them what to do. And they'd understood it immediately, the way people understand things that don't require explanation. 2 lines, facing inward, from the hospital entrance to the far end of the parking lot. No speeches, no cheering, no performance. Helmets off, held in their hands or tucked under their arms, standing with the particular straightness of people who are trying to give something physical form through posture alone. Kevin counted them as he came through the entrance. 189. 4 had left overnight for reasons of family or work, and 4 others had arrived who hadn't been there before, so the number was close to what it had been, and it stretched along the parking lot in 2 long lines, with a path between them wide enough for a woman to walk through with her chin up. Reaper was at the far end. He'd positioned himself there deliberately at the end of the corridor rather than the beginning because he wanted the last face she saw to be a familiar one. Kevin went back inside. Beverly pushed the wheelchair to the entrance and stopped. She'd asked Evelyn twice if she wanted the wheelchair all the way out. Evelyn had said no twice. She wanted to walk. Beverly stopped the chair at the door. Evelyn stood up. She stood up the way that she'd been standing up her whole life, slowly, with effort, without complaint, because standing up was necessary, and so you did it. She straightened her jacket. She touched the breast pocket once the photograph's still there. She looked through the glass doors at the 2 lines of people waiting. Beverly made a small sound beside her. "I know," Evelyn said quietly. "Evelyn, I know." She took a breath. "Open the door." Beverly opened the door. Evelyn stepped through. The cold morning air hit her face, and she stood in it for a moment and looked at what was in front of her, the corridor of people, the rows of men and women who had driven through the night, who had left their families and their home and their ordinary lives to be here, who were standing with their helmets in their hands and their eyes on her, with an expression she recognized, even though she'd never seen it directed at herself. It was the expression of people who are standing in the presence of something they owe. She began to walk. Nobody spoke at first. Then from the first person in the left line, a woman in her 50s, Joanna Reese, who'd been hidden in the lantern table kitchen in 2006, a murmur, "You saved my daughter's Mama Eve. You saved my life." Evelyn kept walking. From the next person, a veteran with a prosthetic arm standing at rigid attention. "You stayed with me 3 nights after I came back from my second tour. I don't know where I'd be if you hadn't." She kept walking. The words came from both sides, one at a time, offered quietly, not performed for the cameras, but given directly person to person, the way a debt is acknowledged when the acknowledgement matters more than the audience. "You bought me boots when I was 16. You never once made me feel like a burden. You fed my father every Thursday for 2 years and never let him pay. You called me son and you meant it. You gave me a job reference and told me I was worth knowing. You hit us. You didn't ask questions. You just hit us and made us sandwiches and let us breathe. You opened on Christmas. You opened on Christmas. You opened on Christmas. Three people said that one, three different Christmases. Evelyn was crying by the third person in the line. She hadn't planned to. She'd intended to walk through this dry-eyed because she was 81 years old and had seen enough of life to understand that some things needed to be received with dignity rather than emotion. But dignity and emotion were not, it turned out, mutually exclusive. She cried and she kept walking, and the walking was the dignity. Halfway down the corridor, she stopped. Not because she was tired, not because she needed to rest. She stopped because she could hear behind her, from somewhere near the hospital entrance, Daniel's voice. She didn't know he was there. She hadn't been told he was there because no one had wanted to tell her. He'd come. Of course he'd come. He'd come with his attorney who had advised against it, and he'd walk through the parking lot watching his mother make her way through the corridor, and something about the watching had moved him in a direction that wasn't remorse and wasn't love, but was something, the stunted, self-serving something that remained in a person like Daniel, where deeper feelings should have been. "Mom," he said, from a distance. "Mom, come back. Mom, let me explain." Evelyn stood in the middle of the corridor. She was very still. She heard his voice. She heard every inflection in it, the practiced pain, the genuine panic barely contained beneath it, the reflex of a man who has managed situations for so long that managing is the only response he has left, even in the moment when managing is finally completely, irrevocably insufficient. Beverly had reached forward and taken her arm. The corridor was absolutely silent. Every person in the two lines was watching. Every camera was pointed at her. And Evelyn Harper, 81 years old, 3 days behind a dumpster, stood in the middle of 189 people who loved her and turned around. She looked at her son. Across 20 feet of parking lot, she looked at him. And she said in a voice that was quiet and completely steady and could be heard in the total silence of that moment by every single person present, "You knew I would wait for you." Daniel opened his mouth. "Don't," she said. He stopped. "You knew I would wait," she said again, "because I was your mother. Because I had been waiting for you your whole life, waiting for you to become the man I believed you were capable of being. And you knew that about me. You knew it and you used it." She held his gaze, not with hatred, with something more devastating than hatred, with clarity. "I prayed for you last night. I want you to know that. Not for what you did to me, for what you did to yourself. Because whatever I lost in those 3 days, I got it back." She touched the breast pocket where the photograph was. "What you lost is not coming back." She turned around. She walked the rest of the corridor. At the end of it, Reaper Cole was standing. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who has been carrying something for 24 years and has just been given permission to set it down. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said simply, "Mama Eve." And Evelyn Harper looked at the scar along his jaw and at the eyes above it that were trying hard to stay composed and not entirely succeeding, and she put her hand on his arm. "You turned out okay," she said. Behind her, the two lines of people were still standing. And behind them, the sound of Daniel Harper being asked by Detective Okafor to place his hands behind his back moved across the parking lot in the thin morning air, and the cameras caught it, and the crowd watched it, and nobody cheered. They just stood there, bearing witness. The way Evelyn had once stood in a diner at 2 a.m. and borne witness to a young man who needed someone to see him. Red pushed through from somewhere and pressed against her left leg. Evelyn looked down. "Good boy," she said, and for the first time in 4 days her hands stopped shaking. The handcuffs went on at 9:22 in the morning in a parking lot in front of 2 news cameras and 189 witnesses, and Daniel Harper did not fight it. He'd calculated in the few seconds between Okafor's instruction and the click of the cuffs whether fighting was an option, whether there was still a version of this where he managed the situation, controlled the narrative, produced a reasonable explanation that a reasonable person could accept. He was a man who had spent his entire adult life calculating exactly that, and the calculation had never failed him until now. It failed him now. He let them put his hands behind his back. His attorney was already on his phone, already pivoting to the next phase bail arraignment, the long procedural machinery of a system that moves slowly enough for skilled people to work within. Daniel understood that phase. He'd been around enough business litigation to understand that the formal beginning of a legal process was not the end of anything. There was still room to maneuver. There were still options. But watching his mother walk away from him down that corridor, watching the back of her, the set of her shoulders, the hand she'd placed on the arm of a man with a scar on his jaw, Daniel Harper understood at a level below strategy and below calculation that something was over. Not just the plan, not just the legal situation. Something between him and her that couldn't be rebuilt because he had used the bricks of it to build a different structure, entirely one designed to serve only himself, and you can't undo that kind of construction. You can tear it down, but the original material is gone. The cameras caught his face in that moment. It ran on the evening news in 4 states. People watched it and argued afterward about what they saw. There, some said shame, some said fear, some said nothing. Just a man finally without a story to tell. One comment shared 40,000 times said simply, "That's what it looks like when a person realizes they've been the villain the whole time." Evelyn didn't watch the news that night. Beverly had taken her home to Beverly's house in Tulsa, the guest room with the yellow curtains that Evelyn had always liked, the one that smelled like cedar, and the particular clean warmth of a house where someone lived who actually cared about it. Red slept at the foot of the bed. Beverly checked on her twice in the night, and both times Evelyn was deeply, thoroughly asleep. The second time Beverly checked, she stood in the doorway for a while and just listened to her sister breathe. 8 months. She'd lost 8 months. She closed the door and went back to bed and lay there in the dark and thought about all the things she should have pushed harder on, all the times Daniel's calm, reasonable voice had smoothed over the edge of her unease, all the Tuesday mornings she'd called and put down the phone thinking probably fine, probably fine. Then she stopped thinking about what she should have done because Evelyn was in the next room breathing steadily, and the past was the past, and the only direction that mattered anymore was forward. She closed her eyes. In the morning, she made breakfast. Tongue. The legal proceedings moved faster than anyone expected. This was partly because of the documentation Tick had assembled, which Okafor described to her supervisor as unusually complete. For a case this early in investigation, a characterization that prompted some questions about its origins that Okafor deflected with the practiced vagueness of a detective who has learned to value results over provenance. It was partly because Ray, the gas station attendant, gave a full written statement within 48 hours, cooperating completely in exchange for consideration on a misdemeanor charge of elder negligence that the DA's office was under the circumstances inclined to view generously. And it was partly because Daniel's wife, whose name was Claire, who had 2 children in a house in a good neighborhood and had spent 11 months telling herself that what Daniel was doing was a family matter that she didn't fully understand and therefore couldn't fully judge, called a separate attorney the morning after the arrest and requested a meeting. What Claire told that attorney and subsequently told Okafor was that she had known. Not everything. Not the insurance policy she claimed credibly that she hadn't known about that, and the investigators found no evidence to contradict her. But the house, the medication, the deliberate isolation. She had known those things and had chosen repeatedly to file them under complicated family dynamics and move on with her day. She told herself that Evelyn was difficult, that Daniel was doing his best, that the situation was more nuanced than it appeared. She had sent the reply to the text message, not the she needs to look confused text, the one after it, the one that said, "Then we let it play out." Okafor showed Evelyn that message 3 weeks into the investigation during a session at Beverly's kitchen table where Evelyn gave her formal statement. She'd asked Evelyn's permission before showing it. Evelyn read it. She set the phone down on the table. She was quiet for a moment. "Claire was in my house for Christmas 13 years in a row," she said. "I taught her how to make Frank's pie crust. She couldn't get the technique at first. It's about cold hands. You have to keep your hands cold. And she came back every year until she had it." She looked at the phone. "The last time she made it, it was better than mine." She pushed the phone gently back toward Okafor. "Do your job," Evelyn said. "I'll do mine." "What's yours?" Okafor asked. Evelyn picked up her coffee. "Getting on with it," she said. "Your time." The charges came down 6 weeks after the arrest. Elder abuse, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, forgery of legal documents, insurance fraud, obstruction for the gas station arrangement. The DA's office had looked at the insurance policy carefully, and for 2 weeks there had been whispered conversations about whether additional charges were supportable, but the evidence for intent beyond exploitation wasn't conclusive enough to pursue. It was enough without it. Daniel's attorney negotiated for 3 weeks and then recommended his client accept a plea agreement because the documentation was overwhelming. In a jury trial, particularly a jury trial in a county where the video of Evelyn Harper giving a stray dog the bigger piece of her last biscuit had been watched by roughly everyone, was not an environment where Daniel Harper was going to find sympathy. He pled guilty to 4 counts. Sentencing was set for the following spring. Claire pled separately to a single count of complicity and received probation and community service and the particular ongoing punishment of being the woman who had typed. Then we let it play out about her mother-in-law's deliberate abandonment, a fact that was now permanently searchable and would follow her in the specific way that the internet follows people who do the thing that everyone says they would never do. Evelyn was asked if she wanted to submit a victim impact statement. She said she would think about it. She thought about it for 2 weeks. Then she sat down at Beverly's kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and wrote for an hour without stopping and handed the pages to Beverly and said, "Tell me if I've said too much." Beverly read it. She handed it back. "You've said exactly enough," she said. The call about the diner came from an unexpected direction. Gus Tillman, the moderator of the Road Family Facebook group, the man who had typed "Someone find this woman" the morning the video spread, had been doing his own research in the weeks following the arrest. Not legal research. Property research. The specific interest of a man who had eaten at the Lantern Table in 2004 and had been thinking about it ever since Evelyn's name came back into his life. He called Reaper on a Thursday morning in November. "The property on Route 9, he said. Thought, the original Lantern Table location. What about it? It's been sitting empty since 2009. I tracked the ownership. After Frank died, the property went into a small estate. Evelyn was the heir, but Daniel had power of attorney by then, and he, surprised, let the taxes lapse." Gus paused. "The county took it. It's been on a delinquent property list for 3 years. The back taxes owed are $14,000. Reaper was quiet. "What are you telling me, Gus?" "I'm telling you," Gus said carefully, "that $14,000 is not an insurmountable number. If you know enough people who owe a debt, they've been looking for a way to pay." Reaper sat down. He looked at the wall of his garage, at the photograph he'd put back up the day after he came home from Morrow Creek, the one of the Lantern Table with the checkered tables and the rows of bikers, and Evelyn in the center with her 2 coffee pots. "You've already started the fundraiser," Reaper said. It wasn't a question. "I've been running it for a week," Gus said. "We're at $11,400 as of this morning. How many people know about it?" "Road Family Group, about 6 other groups. Some of the news coverage from the parking lot linked to it." Gus paused. "Also, Kevin Marsh posted about it. He's got a lot of followers now." Reaper laughed. "Of course he does. We'll hit 14,000 by end of week," Gus said. "Probably by end of tomorrow. And then the question is, what we do with the property. Has anyone asked Evelyn?" A pause. "I was hoping you'd do that part," Gus said. "So." Reaper drove to Tulsa on a Saturday. He called ahead. Beverly answered she'd become in the weeks since the hospital a kind of informal gatekeeper, not out of overprotectiveness, but out of the practical understanding that Evelyn's time and energy were finite and required some management. She'd vetted 3 interview requests, 2 documentary inquiries, and 1 offer from a publishing house that wanted to do a book. Evelyn had declined all of them. "She's not a story," Beverly had told the publishing house pleasantly but without any room in it. "She's a person. Those aren't the same thing." Beverly let Reaper in without hesitation. Evelyn was in the living room with Red at her feet and a cup of coffee in her hand, and she looked different. Not unrecognizably different. But the 3 days in the cold had left marks that were taking time to fully recede, and the weeks of legal proceedings and interviews, and the specific exhausting weight of being the center of something enormous had added their own texture. She looked like a woman who was still in the process of recovering from something which she was, and who was doing it on her own terms, which she also was. She waved Reaper to the chair across from her. "Coffee," Beverly called from the kitchen. "Please," he said. He sat down. He looked at Evelyn. She looked at him with the particular directness that had been there since the first time he saw her again in the parking lot. No performance, no management, just a person looking at another person and seeing them clearly. "You're here about the property," she said. "Gus called you." "Gus called Beverly. Beverly told me." She wrapped both hands around her mug. $14,000. We'll have it by end of the week. She was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do with it? She asked. That depends on what you want, Reaper said. It's your place. It was your and Frank's place. Whatever happens to it should be your decision. Evelyn looked down at her coffee. She thought about Route 9, the parking lot that filled on Friday nights with motorcycles and on Sunday mornings with people who had nowhere else to be. The kitchen that smelled like coffee and a bacon grease, and the particular sweetness of fruit pies cooling on the back shelf. The tables with the checked cloths. The chalkboard menu that Frank rewrote every week in his terrible handwriting that somehow everyone could read. She thought about what it had been. Then she thought about what it could be. Not a resurrection of something gone, because Frank was gone, and that version of it was gone, and you couldn't recover those things, only honor them. But something built on the same foundation, the same principle, the same answer to the same question. What do you do when people have nowhere left to go? You open the door. I don't want it to be a restaurant, she said. Okay. I don't want it to be a business of any kind. I'm 81 years old. I'm not going back into business. She looked up at him. I want it to be a shelter, a free kitchen, veterans, runaways, elderly people who... She stopped. People who've been left behind somewhere. People who need a door that opens when they knock on it. Reaper nodded. We'd need to rebuild, he said. The structure's been sitting empty for 15 years. I know. That's going to take more than $14,000. I know that too. Beverly came in with the coffee and set it in front of Reaper, and then stayed because Beverly had learned over the past weeks that staying was sometimes the most useful thing. There are 189 people, Reaper said, who drove through the night to stand in a hospital parking lot. Most of them know how to build things. All of them know why this matters. He wrapped his hands around the mug. You let us handle the rebuild. You just tell us what you want it to look like when we're done. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. I want it to look like the kind of place where a person can come in off the road, she said, and feel like somebody's glad they're there. That's what it'll look like, Reaper said. She held out her hand. He shook it. And that was that. Tack. They broke ground, or broke floorboard, more accurately on the first Saturday of December. 31 people showed up with tools. By noon, there were 47. By afternoon, someone had posted photographs to the Road family group, and 3 more trucks had pulled in from directions nobody had specifically accounted for. Kevin was there. He'd driven from Morrow Creek with Red in the passenger seat and a toolbox he'd borrowed from his father, and an energy that the nursing program had been benefiting from for weeks. He'd gone back to class the Monday after the hospital parking lot and sat down in his seat and looked at his textbooks with the specific focus of a person who has recently confirmed in the most direct possible way why they're doing what they're doing. He found a box in the back corner of the property under what had been a storage shelf. He almost missed it. He'd been pulling rotten wood and piling it near the door, working methodically, and his hand hit something solid and not decayed under the debris, and he stopped and cleared the area and pulled it out. A shoebox, sealed with rubber bands that had mostly deteriorated. He opened it carefully. Inside letters, folded notes, small pieces of paper in different handwriting, some in pencil, some in pen, some so faded they were barely legible. Some on napkins, some on the backs of receipts. He picked one up. You fed me before I believed my life was worth living. I'm writing this because I want you to know it is. T. He picked up another. Mrs. Harper. My name is James. I came into your diner in 2003 when I was hitchhiking west and I hadn't eaten in 2 days. You gave me the breakfast plate and wouldn't take my money, and when I tried to leave, you handed me a paper bag with a sandwich and an apple, and you said for the road. I'm a high school teacher now. I've been feeding students who come to school hungry for 9 years. It started because of you. He sat down on the floor of the half-demolished building and read for a while. He didn't count them. Later, when someone asked, he guessed there were somewhere between 60 and 80 notes in that box covering a span from the early 1990s through 2008. All of them thanking the same woman for the same essential thing expressed in 60 or 80 different ways that all resolved to the same point: you made me feel like I mattered. He called Reaper over. Reaper read 3 of them, standing up, and then sat down on the floor beside Kevin and read the rest. Neither of them said much while they were reading. When they finished, Reaper held the box carefully, the way you hold something fragile that you've just understood the value of. And he looked at the wall in front of him, already half restored, already beginning to look like a place rather than a ruin. She needs to see these, he said. I know, Kevin said. Not all at once, she can't. I know. Kevin took the box back gently. I'll bring it to her this weekend. We can go through them together. Evelyn read every note. It took 3 sessions across 2 weeks, not because there were so many, but because some of them required stopping, and Evelyn was not a woman who rushed through things that deserved more than speed. Beverly sat with her each time. The 3rd session, at the end of the last note, Evelyn set the papers down on the kitchen table and was very still for a long moment. Then she said, Frank would have cried at every single one. Beverly smiled. You would have made fun of him for it. Absolutely well, Evelyn said. And then I would have cried too in private, and he would have known and not said anything. She looked at the pile of notes. That was our whole marriage. Beverly reached over and covered her hand. He knew, Beverly said. Whatever you were wondering about whether he knew that what you built together mattered, he knew. Evelyn turned her hand over and held Beverly's. We both knew, she said. The rebuild took 11 weeks. They worked on weekends, mostly occasionally during the week when people could get there. The structure was more salvageable than it looked. The frame was solid. Frank had built on a good foundation, and 15 years of neglect had damaged the surfaces more than the bones. New floorboards, new roof on the back section. The kitchen required the most work, and a man named Foster, who'd been a commercial kitchen contractor for 20 years and had eaten at the lantern table twice in his life, showed up one weekend, took one look at what they had to work with, and said he'd be back Monday with his crew. He charged nothing. His crew asked for nothing. By the time they finished, the free kitchen on Route 9 had commercial-grade appliances, a new floor restored original walls where possible, and a dining room that seated 38, 2 fewer than the original, because the accessible entrance required a wider doorway, and nobody was going to argue with that. On the wall facing the entrance, someone had framed 12 of the notes from the shoebox behind glass with a small plaque that read, These were waiting for you. The Route 9 family. Above the kitchen doorway, a wooden sign. Reaper had made it himself. He worked with wood in his garage, had for years, and he'd made this one 3 times before he was satisfied with it. Clean letters sealed against the weather, simple and direct. Nobody eats alone here. Evelyn ran her hand along it on the morning of the opening. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, the place Frank used to stand when he was proud of something and didn't want to say it out loud, and she touched the letters one at a time. Reaper was beside her. It's right, she said. It's right, he agreed. Outside, the parking lot had filled again, not with the urgent, purposeful convergence of the hospital morning, but with something easier. People in warm jackets carrying things. Food donations, cleaning supplies. A woman Evelyn didn't know who'd driven from Kansas City with 3 folding tables in her truck bed. 2 veterans from the Lawton chapter who'd been coming every weekend for 2 months and now moved through the kitchen like they owned the place, which in every way that mattered they did. Kevin was there with Red, who had become the unofficial resident dog of the project and apparently had no memory of ever belonging to a previous life. Gus was there quieter in person than his online presence suggested, a compact man in his 60s who shook Evelyn's hand when they met for the first time and held it for a moment and said only, it's good to see the light back on. Joanna Reese had driven from Amarillo and brought her daughters, grown women now, who knew the story of the kitchen storeroom in 2006, and who embraced Evelyn with the emotional unreserve of people meeting someone who exists for them as part myth and part miracle. Beverly stood near the door watching. She'd been watching for weeks, watching the rebuild, watching the notes, watching her sister move through this enormous thing with the same quality she'd always had, the quality their mother had tried to name once, and settled on mountain spine, and which Beverly now understood more precisely. Evelyn didn't absorb what happened to her and neutralize it. She transformed it. She took the worst things that came at her and used them not to make herself harder, but to clarify what she already knew. Patricia came. She drove an hour from the county hospital on her day off, which she described as not a big deal, and she brought the attending physician who had written Remarkable Woman in Evelyn's chart margin, who confirmed that it was a big deal and he was glad to be there. Deputy Walsh came. He stood near the back and ate 2 plates of food and told Gus he'd been a deputy for 17 years. And that morning in the Morrow Creek parking lot, was the only time he'd ever wished he was someone else, not to avoid the situation, but to be the kind of person who showed up at a hospital at 6 a.m. with a toolbox because of a debt they needed to pay. You showed up when it mattered, Gus told him. Barely, Walsh said. Barely still counts, Gus said. Mom. The formal sentencing happened in the spring. Evelyn attended. She didn't have to. Okafor had told her multiple times that she didn't have to come, that the victim impact statement was already in the record, that her presence wasn't required and might be difficult. I want to be there, Evelyn said. She wore the same jacket she'd worn the morning of the honor walk. She sat in the second row with Beverly on one side and Kevin on the other. Daniel was brought in and seated at the defense table, and he looked in the way of all people who have spent months inside a legal proceeding, reduced not physically, but somehow smaller in the room than the room itself, as if the process of being formally held accountable had collapsed the space he used to take up. He glanced back once. He saw his mother. She met his eyes. She didn't look away. She didn't look at him with hatred or with grief or with the performing of either. She just looked the way you look at something you're trying to see clearly and completely before you set it down for the last time. Then the judge spoke and the proceeding moved forward, and Evelyn looked at the front of the courtroom for the rest of it. The sentence was 4 years with eligibility for parole consideration after 18 months plus full restitution, a number the financial forensics team had calculated at $237,000, including the property sale, the insurance premiums, medication costs, and damages. Daniel's attorney called it proportionate. The DA's office called it a strong message. The judge, before dismissing, made one additional remark. It was not standard procedure. Judges generally don't editorialize at sentencing. This judge had been on the bench for 22 years and had earned the authority to say what he said, and what he said was this. The victim in this case, by all accounts, spent the better part of her adult life demonstrating that human beings owe each other a fundamental dignity of care. The defendant was the single person in the world most directly shaped by her example and most directly positioned to honor it. That he chose instead to exploit it and to exploit her, specifically her, the source of it, is what makes this case, beyond its legal particulars, a tragedy in the truest sense of that word. He looked at the room. Court is adjourned. In the second row, Beverly took Evelyn's hand. Evelyn held it. She didn't cry. She had done her crying in private over that months, for the years she had loved a son who was building toward this, for the Christmases and the phone calls and the ordinary moments that she now understood had been occurring inside a lie. She had cried for all of that thoroughly in the yellow guest room with the cedar smell in the honest dark, where grief is just grief and doesn't have to be anything else. She was done with that part now. She stood up. She walked out of the courtroom into the spring morning and stood on the steps and breathed the air, which was warm and smelled like Oklahoma and new grass and the particular freshness of a season that doesn't care about what came before it. Beverly came out beside her. Kevin came out behind them. Red was in Kevin's car in the parking lot, and he could apparently sense something because he was standing on the seat with his nose against the window. Evelyn looked at the sky for a moment. Then she said, I want to get back. Back where? Beverly asked. To the diner. She was already moving down the steps. I told Gus I'd help with the Thursday breakfast, and I'm already going to be late. Beverly looked at Kevin. Kevin shrugged, smiling. They followed her down the steps. The Thursday breakfast became a thing. Not famous, not large, 30, maybe 40 people on a busy morning, sometimes less, never more than the building could hold. Veterans who'd heard about it through chapter networks, elderly folks who'd been brought by social workers or neighbors, or sometimes just found their way in off the highway because the sign was lit and the parking lot had motorcycles in it, and motorcycles in a parking lot means people, and people means warmth. And warmth is what you go toward when you've been in the cold too long. Runaways. Twice in the first year, young people who arrived thin and scared and sat in the corner booth and ate everything that was put in front of them and were asked nothing beyond, do you need more? Evelyn was there most Thursdays. Not every week. She was 81, then 82, and Beverly maintained a firm and loving jurisdiction over the schedule. But most weeks she was behind the counter with a coffee pot in each hand, which was where she had always belonged, in the specific way that some people fit their purpose so completely that watching them in it feels like watching something natural bob them off or running downhill, light filling a room. She kept the shoebox on the shelf above the register, not to display it, just to have it near. One afternoon, a man came in alone. 60s road-worn jacket, the particular contained energy of someone who has been traveling a long time. He sat at the counter and ordered coffee and looked around the diner with the slow attention of a person recognizing something they didn't expect to find. "You've been here before?" Evelyn asked. He looked at her. "Long time ago," he said. "Different building, same road. A woman used to run a diners out here." He wrapped his hands around the mug. "Fed me once when I had nothing. I've been wanting to come back and say thank you for 20 years. He paused. "I don't suppose you know what happened to her." Evelyn looked at him. Then she set down the coffee pot and held out her hand. "My name is Evelyn," she said. He stared at her, his mouth opened. She waited. He started. "I'm here," she said. "That's what matters." He shook her hand. He didn't let go for a moment. When he finally released it, his eyes were wet, and he looked slightly embarrassed about that. The way men of a certain generation do when emotion arrives without warning. And Evelyn handed him a paper napkin with the same matter-of-fact kindness with which she had been handing people what they needed their entire adult life. "Drink your coffee," she said. "It's a long road back to wherever you came from." He laughed a short, surprised laugh. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Outside, the parking lot held 12 motorcycles and a pickup truck, and Kevin's car with Red in the passenger seat, nose against the window, as always watching the highway with the complete alert confidence of a dog who knows exactly where he belongs and has no intention of being anywhere else. Above the kitchen doorway, the sign, "Nobody eats alone here." The coffee pot was full. The tables were set. The door was open. It was a Thursday morning in Oklahoma, and the light was coming through, and Evelyn Harper was exactly where she had always been, at the center of it, giving people what they needed in the unshowy and irreplaceable way of someone who understands that the deepest form of love is not a feeling, but a practice, not a declaration, but a door, and that the door has to stay open, especially when the road outside is dark. She had been left behind a dumpster with one biscuit. She had given the bigger half away, and everything that followed, every motorcycle on that highway, every note in that shoebox, every person who sat down at that counter and felt perhaps for the first time in a long time that somebody in the world was glad they were there. Everything that followed came from that. Not from what was done to her, from what she chose to give. That was the whole story. That was all of it.